shadow lengthens, dissolving into the dust of ages. I stand at the foot of the Great Pyramids, remembering what we, my ancestors, tried so carefully to conceal. You think ancient Egypt was just gold, pharaohs, and divine reverence. What if I told you that behind this shimmering facade lay truly ghastly, shameful, and even deadly secrets? Imagine the ritualistic killing of hundreds of innocents, the bodies of beautiful women deliberately left to decompose before embalming to prevent the unthinkable, and the blood of the dynasty mingled in the most perverse unions. Prepare yourself. I'm about to reveal ancient secrets not found in history books, a shocking truth that will change your view of a world ruled by gods and terror. Stay until the very end, because the most unbelievable and horrifying facts are saved for last. You were wrong. Everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt was just smoke and mirrors. Beneath the gold and the reverence for gods lay customs so chilling they would make your blood run cold. What if I told you how the pharaoh used people as living fly bait? Or how incest was not just the norm, but a sacred ritual that disfigured entire dynasties? And what about the darkest secret of mummification? Why were embalmers forbidden from touching the bodies of noble women immediately after death? Today, I will turn the idealized image of ancient Egypt inside out and show you its true, horrifying face. From human sacrifices to deadly cosmetics and shocking birth control methods that will turn your stomach, this story will change your perception of this civilization forever. And trust me, the craziest part awaits you towards the end. Stay tuned. I saw their eyes, the eyes of the dead, which remained with me. And I knew that even after death, I would not be able to rest in peace if my beloved's body was not protected. For in this ancient world, where every step was infused with magic, there was a macabre shadow that wandered among the deceased, a shadow capable of defiling what seemed inviolable, the peace of our ancestors and the honor of those who had already crossed the threshold. Are you ready to learn about those who, seemingly, left the world of the living, yet still needed protection from its vices? About the strangest, most shocking, and sometimes disgusting customs of ancient Egypt the textbooks won't tell you about? Discover the truth hidden behind the pharaoh's gold and the magnificent pyramids, gazing at the majestic pyramids, admiring the sparkling waters of the Nile, and marveling at the cult of the pharaohs. It's easy to forget that behind all this splendor lay the amazing and sometimes gruesome customs of my people. If you thought it was all just about gold and gods, you are mistaken. Particularly noteworthy were our views on fertility, pregnancy, and childbirth, which were accompanied by countless rituals, superstitions, and pure magic. For us, ancient Egyptians, fertility was considered a truly divine gift, and pregnancy itself was seen as a sign of special blessing. My people deeply revered the goddesses Hathor and Taweret, considering them not merely patrons of fertility and childbirth, but true protectors of life. Hathor for us embodied love, motherhood, and female sexuality, while Taweret, whom we depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus with an impressive belly, symbolized the unyielding protection of women during the birthing process. Want to know how pregnancy was determined in those distant times? Believe me, the methods my ancestors used will seem quite unusual by today's standards. One of the most famous rituals involved sprouting grain. Imagine the scene. A woman would urinate on grains of wheat and barley, and if they sprouted, it was definitively considered a sign of pregnancy. Moreover, my people believed that the type of grain that sprouted faster could determine the sex of the future child. Wheat indicated a girl, and barley, a boy. In addition to these, at first glance, strange methods of pregnancy detection, pregnant women often wore powerful protective amulets around their necks to ward off evil spirits and the evil eye. Among the most popular were images of the goddess Bastet or the sacred scarab beetle, bringing good fortune. Births themselves, as a rule, took place right at home, and midwives performed a dual role. They were not only experienced medical practitioners, but also powerful magicians. They recited ancient spells and used special oils to facilitate the process of bringing a new person into the world. And what about unwanted pregnancies? One of the curious aspects of ancient Egyptian culture was the attitude towards abortion. My ancestors knew of certain herbs and concoctions that could be used to terminate a pregnancy. Nevertheless, such actions were generally condemned by society, as they were considered contrary to the will of the gods, interfering with their divine plan. Ready for another shocking fact that will make you shudder? In ancient Egypt, there was a gruesome custom according to which servants had to die with their masters. This ritual, which involved burying servants alongside their owners, was particularly actively practiced in the early periods of Egyptian history, the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, roughly from 3000 to 2600 BC. In those times, our rulers and nobility considered it vital to take with them into the afterlife not only luxury items, but also living people who would continue to serve them even after death. And where did we find evidence of such a horrifying tradition? The most striking examples of this practice were discovered in the necropolis of Abydos and Saqqara. In the tombs of early dynastic pharaohs, archaeologists found the remains of dozens, and sometimes even hundreds, of servants and courtiers buried together with the ruler. These individuals were typically young and perfectly healthy, which clearly indicated their premature and most likely ritualistic death. Their bodies were placed in separate chambers near the pharaoh's tomb, symbolizing their eternal readiness to continue serving their master even in the afterlife. Why did such a custom exist? The roots of this practice ran deep into the Egyptians' understanding of the afterlife. My ancestors believed that after death, a person would continue to live in the duat, the underworld, where they would need the same comforts and services as in earthly life. Servants were expected to perform the same duties as in life, caring for their master, fulfilling his commands. But fortunately, as Egyptian culture and social structures evolved, this cruel practice gradually faded into the past. By the time of the Old Kingdom, roughly from 2600 to 2000 BC, human sacrifices were replaced by shabti figures, small figurines depicting servants. These figurines were placed in tombs where, as we believed, they would come to life in the afterlife and serve as faithful assistants to the deceased. Imagine, incestuous marriages in ancient Egypt were not just considered normal. They were an integral part of our state and religious system. Pharaohs often married their sisters or even their daughters. This practice was dictated not by a lack of other options, but by a firm, unwavering desire to strengthen power and ensure an uninterrupted dynastic succession. Why was this so important? In my ancient Egyptian civilization, marriages between close relatives were an integral part of life. These unions were considered sacred and intended to preserve the purity of the bloodline within the dynasty, as well as to strengthen its divine nature. In those times, we believed that the pharaoh was the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, and his consort represented the goddess Isis. The marriage between them symbolized the unity of divine forces, which gave this union a special, sacred significance. And were there real consequences? One of the most famous examples of such marriages was the union of Pharaoh Tutankhamun and his half-sister Ankhesenamun. This marriage was intended to strengthen the dynasty's rule, but, as is well known, incest often led to severe genetic consequences. Studies of royal mummies have shown that many pharaohs suffered from congenital diseases, such as deformed limbs and a weakened immune system. However, the practice of incest was widespread not only among members of the royal family, but also among the general population. For example, during the tribal era, marriages between siblings accounted for up to 20% of all unions. This was explained not only by religious beliefs, but also by economic reasons, as such unions helped preserve family property. But was it universally acceptable? It is important to note that even in ancient Egypt, the attitude towards incest was not always uniform. Some texts suggest that such marriages were not approved of when it came to ordinary people as opposed to members of the royal family. This indicates that incest was more of a privilege of ruling dynasties than a universally accepted norm. How did my ancestors deal with pesky insects when they made life a living hell? Ancient Egypt was known for its attention to hygiene and cleanliness, but the problem of flies remained constant and debilitating. These insects not only bothered us, but also posed a serious threat to health, as they could carry life-threatening diseases. To solve this problem, Egyptians sometimes resorted to rather strange and radical methods. What was the most shocking solution? One of the most astonishing methods of fly control in ancient Egypt was the practice of using human bait. According to the historian Herodotus, Pharaoh Pipi II, who reigned in the 20th century BC, ordered his servants to smear themselves with honey to ward off flies. These unfortunate people had to sit motionless near the pharaoh, attracting the insects. In this way, the ruler and his courtiers remained relatively undisturbed, while the unfortunate servants suffered from constant bites. The use of honey as bait was also common in temples and the homes of Egyptian nobility. We believed that this method repelled troublesome flies during important rituals and receptions. Curiously, such a sacrifice to flies could be seen as a form of worship to the sun god Ra, as the solar disk was often associated with flying insects. How seriously was marital infidelity regarded in my ancient Egypt? Infidelity was considered not merely a transgression, but a grave crime here. In my society, marital fidelity was not only a matter of personal relationships, but also a reflection of deep social and religious norms. Marriage in Egyptian culture was not just a union of two people, but an important social contract symbolizing the cosmic order itself, Ma'at, the principle of truth, harmony, and justice. Adultery was perceived as a direct threat to this order, like a crack in the fabric of the universe, and what awaited transgressors. Historical sources, such as legal papyri and funerary inscriptions, indicate that the consequences of marital infidelity could be very severe, especially for women. According to Egyptian law, a woman caught in infidelity could be banished from her family, deprived of property and social status, reduced to nothing. However, despite the severity of the measures, the application of corporal punishment or the death penalty for adultery in Egypt was rare, and apparently applied only in exceptional cases where infidelity was associated with other grave crimes, such as treason or theft. And what did our text say? In literary works, such as the Teachings of Ptah-hotep, moral instructions emphasized the paramount importance of marital fidelity for societal harmony. Husbands and wives were depicted as equal partners, mutually responsible for the well-being of their family. Interestingly, accusations of adultery were often heard in court. If the accusation proved false, the accuser was punished, which helped prevent abuses of the legal system. This clearly shows that even in such a structured society, we adhered to principles of justice. Ready to delve into a truly darker side of Egyptian customs that will make you question the boundaries of human morality? Ancient Egypt is known for its cult of death and unique view of the afterlife. However, within this culture existed very strange and sometimes shocking customs related to the handling of dead bodies. Necrophilia, although condemned by society, sometimes became part of everyday life. This was a real, frightening problem, especially when it came to the bodies of beautiful noblewomen. How did my ancestors try to combat this repugnant phenomenon? The ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the bodies of attractive women were intentionally left at home for several days before burial. This was done to prevent possible cases of necrophilia among embalmers who had direct access to the bodies. To protect the honor of the deceased, families began to closely monitor their condition during the mummification process. In some cases, bodies were handed over to embalmers only after the decomposition process had begun, making them less attractive. Some texts also mention punishments for those found guilty of necrophilia. Such actions were considered not only crimes, but also a desecration of the deceased's memory, a terrible sacrilege. Mysteriously, the Egyptians' attitude towards dead bodies was quite ambivalent. On the one hand, we perceived them as sacred symbols of eternal life and a manifestation of deep respect for ancestors. On the other hand, we saw in them a source of potential evil and danger. We viewed our bodies as sacred vessels that needed to be preserved for eternal life. Ironically, proximity to the dead was considered necessary for ritual purification, and embalmers occupied a central place in this complex social system. And what about beauty? Cosmetics played an incredibly important role in the daily lives of ancient Egyptians. Its use went far beyond mere aesthetics, becoming part of our essence. Cosmetics were considered not only a form of adornment, but also served protective and ritualistic purposes. However, many ingredients my ancestors used are now considered deadly. What was their secret to the perfect gaze? One such component was lead, a poisonous metal hidden behind beauty. The most famous example of lead-based cosmetic is kohl, black eyeliner made from lead sulfide, or galena. Kohl was used by both men and women, applied thickly around the eyes to create that iconic, elongated cat eye look. This not only highlighted facial features, but also held deep ritual significance. In ancient Egypt, cosmetics served not only an aesthetic, but also a practical function. My ancestors believed that cosmetics protected them from evil spirits, diseases, and harsh sunlight, reflecting its relentless rays. But was there anything beneficial about it? Interestingly, recent studies have shown that despite its toxicity, lead could offer some benefits. Small doses of lead compounds could stimulate the immune system and help combat eye infections, which were so common in the dusty conditions of ancient Egypt. However, prolonged and frequent use of such cosmetics could undoubtedly lead to poisoning and long-term, irreparable health problems. Besides black pigment, Egyptians also used green and blue pigments, made from malachite. These colors were associated with gods, especially with the sun, god Ra, and the goddess Hathor. The use of such makeup emphasized our connection to the divine world, bringing us closer to the heavens. How important was cosmetics? It was so significant in ancient Egypt that it was used not only in life, but also in the afterlife, and for preparation for life after death. Amulets and cosmetic vessels often served as funerary offerings, accompanying us into eternity. And what lay hidden behind all this majestic culture? In ancient Egypt, as in other ancient societies, there was a problem of sexual violence, whose perception was complex and multifaceted. Despite a high level of cultural development and a sophisticated legal system, violence against women was not uncommon and was often concealed behind religious or social norms, like a dark shadow. In practice, women in ancient Egypt, although they possessed certain rights, often became victims of violence. Particularly vulnerable groups were female slaves and servants, whose status allowed their masters to use them for their own purposes. Such actions rarely caused public condemnation, as slaves were not considered full members of society. Their fate was not in their own hands. But was there any justice at all? Nevertheless, Egyptian law did provide protection for women, especially for free citizens. In ancient Egypt, the protection of women's rights was an important aspect of society. Laws provided for various punishments for rape, ranging from fines to capital punishment for a grave crime. Legal papyri from that time contain documented evidence of court proceedings related to violence. For example, a papyrus from Deir el-Medina describes cases where a man was punished for attempting to rape his neighbor's wife. Special attention was paid to protecting the virginity of young girls. If a girl became a victim of rape, her family could demand compensation from the perpetrator or insist on his punishment. However, when it came to women of lower social status, their fate often depended on the will of the surrounding men, which was a bitter truth of our society. Want to learn about another curious aspect of daily life? In ancient Egypt, children often went completely naked until a certain age, which was considered a normal part of their culture and daily life, rather than something unusual. This practice was due to both climatic and social factors. The hot weather meant that children spent most of their time without clothes, and the lack of need to wear them made them more comfortable and free. And why was this so? In ancient Egypt, the weather was so hot that clothing for young children was not only unnecessary, but also caused discomfort. Nudity was considered natural, and there was no shame in it. Until adolescence, children of both sexes usually wore no clothing. Instead, their bodies were adorned with various amulets and protective symbols that held deep ritual significance. The most common amulets included symbols of the demon god Bez, the protector of children and family harmony, and the scarab beetle, symbolizing rebirth and protection from evil. When did they start dressing? As children grew into adolescence, they began to wear simple loincloths or linen tunics, symbolizing their transition into adulthood, into the world of responsible adults. Girls sometimes wore jewelry and headpieces to emphasize their femininity, while boys participated in rituals symbolizing their coming of age, their new status. How was female physiology regarded in ancient Egypt? Menstruation and contraception were closely tied to religion in my ancient society, infused with mystery and magic. In ancient Egypt, menstruation was surrounded by an aura of mystery and deep mysticism. Female physiology was perceived as a divine process, controlled by powerful fertility goddesses such as Hathor and Taweret. Although menstruation is rarely mentioned in texts, archaeological findings and medical papyri give us a better understanding of how Egyptians viewed women's health and their bodies. Was it shameful? Menstruation in ancient Egypt was not considered shameful, but it was associated with certain temporary restrictions. During menstruation, women were considered ritually impure, and they were forbidden from participating in religious rituals or visiting temples, so as not to defile sacred spaces. However, in daily life, menstruation was perceived as a natural, unavoidable process. Egyptian women used tampons made of soft papyrus or strips of linen soaked in plant oils to provide additional comfort. These hygiene products were simple in design, but effective and widely used by us. Some sources also mention the use of powders made from sand and herbal mixtures to maintain cleanliness, and how to avoid unwanted pregnancy. In ancient Egypt, there were many methods of contraception, from mechanical to magical, demonstrating our ingenuity and knowledge. One of the most famous contraceptive recipes, preserved in medical papyri, is the Kahun papyrus, dating back to 1850 BC. This recipe recommended using a mixture of acacia, honey, and sodium, which women were to insert into the vagina. Research has shown that acacia is capable of releasing lactic acid, which has spermicidal properties. Incredible knowledge for those times. Among other methods was the use of crocodile dung mixed with honey as a vaginal barrier. Although such methods may seem unusual and impractical by modern standards, they demonstrate the Egyptians' deep understanding of the properties of herbs and plants and their desire to control their lives. If you enjoyed this story and dared to delve into the darkest corners of ancient Egyptian history, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new content that will make you think. Be sure to check out our other videos, where we explore the most mysterious and disturbing pages of history that you'll never hear about in school.